At the Future of Brain Health Symposium, only a couple of days ago in Amsterdam, I gave a presentation that sort of encapsulates a clean, quick, brief summary of my philosophical views, of my ontological views. And what I wanted to do now is to sort of give you a new edition, a new spin of that presentation, in which I have a little more time to talk about the details, but still keep it simple. And I call it my small theory of everything. Small because it's quite simple. The difficulty in it is just to overcome our implicit built-in assumptions and prejudices about the nature of reality. But if you can take that quick shift, that small shift in perspective, what I'm going to talk about is actually very simple, almost in your face. I'll talk a little bit also about the implications to healthcare, because that was the theme of the conference. So here we go, a brief introduction to my small theory of everything. And of course, we start from this big question, this big mystery in science today, which is the mind and brain relationship. It has been chosen by Science magazine in its anniversary edition in 2005 as the second most important unanswered question in science. The first question being the nature of matter. I would say it should have been the first question, the relationship between mind and brain, because whatever we say about matter is conditional, is dependent on this fundamental relationship between mind and brain. All of our knowledge is in mind, after all. Now, that there is a relationship between mind and brain is clear, right? I mean, we can stimulate the brain in certain regions of the brain, which leads to marked changes in our subjective experience of reality, in our emotions, in our thoughts, and so on. Drugs, psychoactive drugs, have an influence on the brain, and they change how we feel subjectively about life, about ourselves, about the world. Brain trauma has a marked effect on our inner life. So that there is a relationship between mind and brain is empirically obvious. And many people then take it for granted that the brain generates the mind, like the liver generates bile, that the mind is the product, the outcome of brain function. The problem, however, is what is called in philosophy and neuroscience the hard problem of consciousness, which is that there is nothing to the properties and dynamics of matter that allow us to deduce the qualities of experience. We do not even know how to think about how the feeling of seeing red, the feeling of loving someone, the feeling of being afraid, how any of those subjective experiences can arise out of mass, momentum, charge, and spin, the properties of matter. There seems to be an unbridgeable gap between these two worlds. And it's known as the hard problem of consciousness, and it has not been solved, and we have not made progress towards solving it. Now, there are at least two mainstream hypotheses about this relationship between mind and brain. The first one is what's called emergence, the idea that consciousness, subjectivity, is an emergent property of the interaction of neurons or subatomic particles, the subatomic particles that form the brain. There are many instances of emergence in nature that are well known. For instance, snowflakes. The fractal patterns of snowflakes are an emergent property of the way water molecules combine together under low temperature. The thing, however, is that in every known, recognized, understood instance of emergence, the emergent property can be deduced from the properties of the smaller components of the system, the underlying components of the system. For instance, in the case of snowflakes, we can deduce their fractal shapes from the properties of water molecules and their behavior under low temperature. That deduction can be made so accurately, in fact, that we can even simulate the formation of snowflakes on a computer where we see the formation of those fractal shapes. So in every known instance of emergence, we can deduce the emergent property from the characteristics of the lower level components of the system, except for consciousness. We cannot deduce, not even in principle, how it feels to see red, how it feels to love someone, how it feels to be afraid, from the mass, charge, spin, and momentum of the subatomic particles making up the brain. As such, to say that consciousness is an emergent property of the brain is the mere labeling of a fundamental unknown. We just gave it a name and we feel warm and fuzzy as if we had explained anything. Nothing has been explained. Alternatively, it's an appeal to magic. We are basically giving a name to the magic arisal of a subjective experience from allegedly dead matter. It's an appeal to magic, and again, it doesn't explain anything. The problem is so serious that some materialist philosophers, in order to get around this problem instead of solving it, have proposed with a serious face that consciousness itself is an illusion, that the brain computes that it is conscious, but it isn't really. If you think about it, this is absurd. I mean, I can create a computer program that creates a variable called conscious, and then after very complex calculations attributes the Boolean value true to the variable conscious, such that conscious is true, and that will not make the computer any more conscious than otherwise. The manipulation of symbols and the attribution of values to symbols doesn't make anything conscious. This is so obvious. Consciousness is the only carrier of reality we or anyone can ever know. Knowledge resides in consciousness. What has never been in consciousness in anyone's mind might as well not exist. To say that consciousness is an illusion is an absurdity. It requires an arbitrary redefinition of the word consciousness in a way that is simply not what people mean when they say consciousness. So, the mainstream hypothesis can be reduced to either the labeling of an unknown, an appeal to magic, in which both cases nothing is explained, or absurdity, like the idea that consciousness is an illusion. So what is going on? What I want to put forward is, actually, I want to take a step back. I want to take a step back from all this conceptual analysis that we have been doing, and just stick to what we do know. We do not know that the brain generates consciousness. We only know that there is a relationship between the two. And if we are very honest to what we can deduce empirically, the only thing we do know is that the brain is the second-person perspective of first-person experience. I have a first-person experience right now. I'm in my office, I see a computer screen in front of me, I see a window behind that computer screen, I hear the sound of my own voice, I hear a car passing on the street in front of my house. That is my first-person experience. If you could look at my brain right now and see its activity, you would be witnessing a second-person perspective of my first-person experience. You would be having a second perspective on the phenomenon that we call my first-person experience, like two camera angles to the same phenomenon. We are not saying that one generates the other. We are only saying that the brain and its activity is the second-person perspective of first-person experience. This is empirically undeniable. To any conscious, active brain, there corresponds first-person experience. And my seeing that active brain is my second-person perspective of someone else's first-person experience. Very well. Now, what is the physical brain? The physical brain is a physical system composed of atoms and force fields that organize these atoms together. That's the same as the entire universe, which is also a physical system composed of atoms, force fields, and whatnot. The brain, just like the rest of the universe, is just a physical system. So what nature seems to be telling us is that if there is a first-person perspective correlated to that object we call a brain, then there is no reason not to believe, not to infer, that there is also a first-person perspective corresponding to the whole of the universe, that there is something it is like to be the whole of the universe, that the universe as a whole is itself the second-person perspective of a first-person experience at a universal level, at the level of mind at large, as I like to call it, or a cosmic consciousness, as my friend Deepak Chopra likes to call it, a universal mind, so to say. Now, I am not the only one to be open to this hypothesis. I mean, mainstream physicist Lee Smolin from the Perimeter Institute, in a book he published a couple of years ago in 2013, he was quite open to this, and I'm quoting him here. He's open to the idea that consciousness is the intrinsic aspect, or the first-person perspective of a system that we call the brain, and that the universe as a whole may also have an intrinsic aspect. In other words, may also have first-person experience, and that we are basically living within a cosmic nervous system. And then you might say, well, Bernardo, this doesn't really add up, because the universe at large doesn't look at all like a nervous system. It doesn't look like a brain. It's like discrete chunks of matter floating around in the vast distances of space without anything really connecting them. There are no synapses. There's no network in the universe. It doesn't look like a brain. Well, consider this. We are very tiny creatures. We are the world around us, even the universe we can see with our telescopes, is a tiny fraction of the whole of existence, of the whole of the universe. This would be equivalent to our being microscopic little people sitting on the edge of a synaptic cleft in the brain, the connection between two neurons, and watching these loose chunks of neurotransmitter molecules floating around in the synaptic cleft and eventually attaching to receptor sites. You would also say, oh, just loose chunks of matter floating around in the vast distances of the synaptic cleft. It doesn't look like anything coherently interconnected together. But if we zoom out and we look at the brain as a whole, then we see that it's actually a highly interconnected system, which we call the brain. So what would happen if we could zoom out in the universe at large and look at how the universe is formed at the largest scales? It would look like this. You see, we've computed how the universe looks like at the highest scales, and it looks like a nervous system. You see here a comparison between a simulated image of the universe at very high scales and neurons in a mouse's brain, and you see that the pattern of interconnections are very similar. And this is not only a visual comparison, and you might claim I have just chose the pictures in such a way as to make them look alike, and it's a cheat, it's an illusion. But there has actually been mathematical study of these patterns of clustering and interconnection, and it has been demonstrated that indeed the universe at the largest scales seems to obey unknown laws that just make it look like and grow like a human brain. This has been demonstrated, although the reasons for this are still mysterious. We do not know what these underlying laws are. We just are able to infer that they are there because things really look similar. Okay, and then you might say, well, Bernardo, if the whole universe is one nervous system, one mind at large, one cosmic mind, one cosmic consciousness, so to say, why is it that I have a separate, tiny, disconnected inner life? Why is it that I'm not aware of everything that's going on in the universe? After all, I'm part of the universe, and if the universe is one mind at large, I should know everything that's going on. I should even know how you feel. I should be aware of the inner lives of every living being, because we are all in this one mind at large. But that doesn't seem to be the case. We have separate, disconnected inner lives. So what's going on? Well, at the conference, I have appealed, because the attendance of the conference was composed of doctors, nurses, people involved in clinical care and healthcare in general, people with clinical experience. And I use this metaphor of dissociative identity disorder. This is a condition formerly called multiple personality disorder, in which the patient develops multiple personalities, dissociated personalities, that are also called alters. And these dissociated personalities often are not even aware of each other. And when they are, they often don't like each other and they want to hurt or kill each other. They are quite dissociated, quite separated. They don't share the same memories. They don't share the same preferences, the same goals. They're highly dissociated in memories and preferences. And yet they are unquestionably all part of the same psyche, of the same person. Now, these alters, they take turns in time controlling the person, so to say. Now, space-time is an integrated unit, as an integrated entity, as we know since Einstein, since the general theory of relativity. So it is entirely conceivable that there might be alters in space as well, alters in space-time. And the hypothesis that I want to put forward to you is that what we call life is a dissociative process in this universal consciousness, in this universal mind at large, just like dissociative identity disorder. Life, each living creature, is an alter, a dissociated personality with its own memories of mind at large. And living bodies, metabolism, biology, is just the image of these dissociated alters of mind at large, of this cosmic consciousness. To give you some intuition about this, let's make a comparison here. We are able today to put a person with dissociative identity disorder under a functional brain scanner, an fMRI, and we are able to identify in the person's brain these little processes here, neural processes, that are correlated with the dissociative identity of the person, with the dissociation of multiple personalities in the person. So these neural processes are the image of these dissociated alters in the person's brain. This is established today. Now, if the universe at large is a kind of brain, is the second person perspective of a universal first person inner life, first person experience, set of experiences, then it is entirely logical that if mind at large has dissociative identity disorder, we should also be able to find the images of the dissociative processes in mind at large. And my contention is that we can find them. They are us. You're looking at one right now. I am the image of a dissociative process in mind at large. You are the image of another dissociative process of mind at large. A mosquito, a bee, they're all images of dissociative processes in mind at large. Even plants and vegetables, they may be images of the beginning of this dissociation, the early stages, not yet complete, but the beginning of the dissociation. I contend that this is what life is, the image of dissociative processes in mind at large, that being the reason why we think that we are separate from the rest of the universe, that we have our separate, private, inner lives. We are simply dissociated. We are alters of mind at large. According to this view, if I look out to the inanimate universe around me, composed of rocks and moons and stars and nebulae and galaxy clusters, all of that are images of non-dissociated processes of mind at large, non-dissociated processes of mind at large, as perceived by me, an alter of mind at large. They are indeed outside me as an alter. They are outside my dissociated complex of mind at large, but they are not outside mind itself. They are not outside consciousness. When we say that there is a world outside, it means outside the alter, not outside mentality. There is no need to postulate a world outside mentality. And when I see other living creatures, other human beings, cows, dogs, cats, flies, plants, algae, bacteria, I am seeing the image of other dissociated processes of mind at large, other alters, as they appear to me, who am also an author of Mind at Large. Now, notice that all non-dissociated processes in Mind at Large, in other words, the inanimate universe, are just the images of subjective experiences. They are the second-person perspective of experience, of first-person experience. And the views of an author, my experiences of the world and other living beings, they are also subjective perspectives as far as I can know. Subjectivity is the carrier of my reality the only carrier of my reality that I can ever know. So everything is then subjectivity. Everything is mentation. With this idea of dissociation, we can explain the fact that the world seems to be external, outside of me, outside my volition, without having to infer a whole universe outside mentation, a whole universe outside consciousness. And if there is no universe outside consciousness, the hard problem of consciousness just disappears. It melts away like butter under the sun, because the hard problem arises from, one, inferring a universe outside consciousness, which is an abstraction of consciousness itself, and then trying to explain consciousness from that abstraction of consciousness. This will never work. We are just chasing our own tails at light speed. But if all there is consciousness, then consciousness is the ontological primitive, and the entirety of reality can be explained as just modulations, excitations, vibrations of consciousness alone. The idea of a world outside me arising from dissociation in consciousness, not from a world outside consciousness. You may ask, well, these ideas sound kind of new agey and crazy and unreasonable and non-scientific, but nothing could be further from the truth. There has been a paper published in Nature magazine, you can see here on the top, volume 436 in July 2005, 10 years ago almost, published by Professor Richard Cohn-Henry from Johns Hopkins University, in which he basically bit the bullet and he said the universe is entirely mental. And he didn't say that because of philosophical preferences or philosophical rationale. He was just aware of experiments in physics that seemed to be leading to this conclusion. Let me explain this a bit. If the universe were indeed outside of consciousness, this would have certain implications that could be tested in laboratory experiments. And they have been tested, and the results contradict the hypothesis. The results contradict this idea that things exist independent of our conscious observation of them. And this is what motivated Professor Cohn-Henry to arrive at this conclusion. He went further, even said that many physicists try to go around this implication of the experiments, and they try to find very complicated, tortuous theories to save this idea of a universe outside consciousness. And what he says is that this is counterproductive. It doesn't generate any new physics. It just perpetuates the illusion of a universe outside consciousness. And he finishes his paper in a quite spectacular way. He even uses the S word, which I try to avoid. But he basically concludes the universe is immaterial in the sense of not being outside consciousness, not being outside mind. He bit that bullet fully. Now, this was 10 years ago. In the meantime, in the last 10 years, many more experiments in physics have been done, trying to find those things that would be consistent with the idea of a universe outside consciousness at a microscopic level. And just to show some references to you, I'm not going to go through these, I just want to mention them. At least 4 new papers, one only a few weeks ago in 2015 by Manning and et al., in which they tested those things, and they realized again, confirming again, that the universe doesn't behave in the way one would expect it to behave if it indeed were outside consciousness, outside mind. So the inevitable conclusion is that it isn't. The universe is entirely mental, and therefore we are dissociated authors of this mind at large, whose second-person perspective is the inanimate universe we see. Now, what are the implications for healthcare, which was the theme of the conference? Let me speed up a little bit. If the universe is entirely mental, then everything is the image of mental processes. There's nothing else it can be, right? The universe at large is mental and nothing but mental. So our bodies are the image of mental processes. What else could they be? But there are two types of mental processes. The first one are the neurocorrelates of consciousness, which are known empirically to be associated with our ordinary self-reflective awareness. But there are aspects of our mentation that fall under the threshold of ordinary awareness. They aren't self-reflective. They are in consciousness. We know them. We just don't know that we know them. They compose what we would call the subconscious psyche, the subconscious mind of a human being. Now, I contend that the image of those subconscious, dissociated mental processes is the physical body. That's what the body is. It's the second person perspective of our subconscious mental activity. Therefore, if you influence and change your subconscious inner life, you will necessarily change your physical health, your physical state of health, because the latter is simply the image of the former. It's not a separate thing. It's the way our subconscious psychic life looks like from the point of view of another person, or even from your own point of view if you look down at your body. And the physical, inanimate universe, again, is just the second person perspective, the image of non-dissociated mental processes in mind at large, out of which we arise as a dissociative process. From this perspective, what are drugs and surgery? In a mental universe, drugs and surgery can only be the image of non-dissociated processes in mind at large. There's nothing else they can be. Therefore, the fact that drugs and surgery have an impact on your subjective experience of reality, like if you get brain surgery or if you take psychoactive drugs, is no more surprising than the fact that your thoughts can influence your emotions, or the other way around, that your emotions can influence your thoughts. Two different types of mental processes can influence one another. That's the reason why surgery and psychoactive drugs influence your experience of life. It's one mental process, namely a non-dissociated process whose image is a drug or physical surgery or physical trauma, influencing another mental process, which is your ordinary awareness, whose image are the neurocorrelates of consciousness. Two types of mental processes influencing one another. Nothing surprising there. Now, traditional medicine has always focused on mainstream medicine over the past 100 years has focused on drugs and surgery. It has focused coming from the non-dissociated part of mind at large and influencing the alter that arises from it, namely our physical body. That is, of course, effective. It's a physical intervention. Non-dissociated mental processes affecting dissociated mental processes whose image are our bodies. No surprise that it's effective. But it ignores the other channel. It ignores the possibility that through changes in our ordinary awareness, in the things that we think, feel, believe, grant validity to, by influencing these in just the right way, we allow the psychic changes perhaps to sink into the subconscious mind, therefore directly influencing our physical health. Because what is our physical health but the image, the second person perspective of our subconscious psychic activity? And one could do that through psychotherapy, talk therapy, through meditation, prayer, visualization, even suggestion. If one wonders why the placebo effect is so strong, so effective, well, if you think about it under this framework I'm proposing here, there's nothing really surprising about this. Suggestion changes the contents of our ordinary awareness, our beliefs, our expectations, and if it's really strong, it sinks into the subconscious mind, directly influencing our physical health. So, an integral approach to healthcare should use these two avenues. One coming from the bottom, from the non-dissociated aspects of mind at large, through surgery and drugs, and the other one from the highly dissociated, ordinary egoic awareness, such that it sinks into the subconscious and affects our physical health as well. This would be the most complete approach to healthcare, in my view. People tend to call it complementary medicine. These other approaches to healthcare based on talk therapy, meditation, and so on, and that's a very appropriate name, as you can see in this figure. It is literally complementary. It simply makes use of the other avenue of treatment that is neglected by today's allopathic mainstream medicine. Now, for more details of all of this, my ontology, my philosophical view of the nature of reality, implications for healthcare, all of this can be found in my most recently released book called Brief Peeks Beyond, Critical Essays on Metaphysics, Neuroscience, Free Will, Skepticism, and Culture. It's available everywhere, certainly available everywhere online, on Amazon and other online stores. And it's both in paperback and ebook format, available for download immediately. So if you're curious, you can have a look. In the meantime, thanks. I hope you've enjoyed my small, simple theory of everything.